there, Sajan? He might have gone away from his computer because I couldn't get a hold of him earlier either. And let's see, the other question was from Ganga Shakti, but let me check if she's here yet. Does not seem like she's here. Okay, well, oh, Sajan, okay.
I can't hear anything.
I can't either. Oh, wait. Sorry. Okay, so the third question is from Brajhari Das, and he sent it to me through email, so I'm going to just read it here. It says, Srila Bhakti Vedanta Prabhupada in his commentary to Bhagavad Gita.
What? I think you want to read it slow enough that Shyam Sundar can translate it at the same time, since he won't have it to read from.
Okay, good idea. Yeah, let's start slower. So, Srila Bhakti Vedanta Prabhupada in his commentary to Bhagavad Gita 7.8 says, one who knows God knows that the impersonal conception and personal conception are simultaneously present in everything, and that there is no contradiction. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya established his sublime doctrine, Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, simultaneous oneness and difference. If I understand correctly, so now Brajhari is saying, if I understand correctly, differentiation could be connected with personalism and oneness with impersonalism. My question is, how are we to understand in Gaudiya Vaishnavism the statements that speak of the jivas as being one with Brahman?
How are we to understand the statements in the scripture that speak about the jiva being one with Brahman? That's the question. And in that, in the context of the report there of Srila Prabhupada, right?
Yes.
Right. Hold on one second. Can you say something?
Hello. Haribo. Can you hear me?
Again?
Hello?
Yeah, I can.
Haribo.
Right. So, yes, I think what Prabhupada is saying there, basically, of course, is that the Gaudiya Vaishnava metaphysic is Achintya Bheda Bheda. And one of the reasons for that is the fact that there are statements in the scripture that speak about oneness of the jiva with Brahman, which is what the question is about. But there are also many statements in the scripture as to the difference between the jiva and the Godhead. So, given the fact that, for example, in the Upanishads, which the Vedanta Sutra seeks, I should say, the Vedanta Sutra to explain the diverse statements of the scripture of the Upanishads primarily, and also with reference to some other texts, but primarily to the Upanishads. The sutras seek to harmonize the various statements, some of which seem to be in opposition to others. So it's a kind of I look at it as the first attempt in human society at theology, reasoning about the implications of the revelation. And then, of course, there are commentaries on the Vedanta Sutra, which is in itself kind of a shorthand version, almost like Vyas took notes, and they're very cryptic. So you have then different sampradayas who look at the cryptic statements in the Vedanta Sutra, which are again largely in reference to the various statements of the Upanishads, in an effort to have them all make sense and appear to be giving a concerted message. And so there are different ideas then amongst the different schools of Vedanta of what that concerted message is. However, that said, most of them all are in agreement on basic points, such as the oneness or difference between the jivas and the Godhead. Four of them, or let's say the four Vaishnava Sampradayas, one of which our Gaudiya Sampradaya is thought to be connected with, the Brahma Sampradaya. Four of them out of five, the fifth being Shankar, all have basically the same conclusion, that in some sense there's a oneness with Bhagavan, but there's a difference, and there's an emphasis on the difference, of course, for the sake of devotion and making for a doctrine, if you will, of love, which requires an interaction between the object of love and the love itself. So I'm just saying, despite the fact that there are different perspectives on the sutras, there's a lot of agreement. Even with Shankar, in many respects, we agree, but we diverge from him, all the Vaishnava Sampradayas, considerably, because he takes the statements of the scripture that speak about oneness between jiva and Brahman as absolute and final, and relativizes, if you will, all the statements to the contrary. So our perspective then on the oneness with the jiva and Brahman is, of course, the idea that if we're going to school someone about a subject that they have no access to other than through ourselves, then how we're going to tell them about that? Well, we may have to go in stages. So let's use the example of the cave. Two people living in a cave, they've never seen the sun. They live inside the cave. They don't, there's no opening to the cave, let us say. So one of them happens to get out somehow. Now you can imagine the experience of you live your whole life in a cave and you come out and you see the sun. I mean, you see vegetation, you see water, you see clouds, you see rain, food of all varieties. I mean, what the sun does compared to what's done in its absence is unimaginable. I mean, it's inconceivable. So to go out from the cave into the sunlight and experience all that's out there, and then to come back in and tell your friend that I've seen a world beyond the cave. And he says, well, what's it like? Where do you begin? What are you going to tell him? He has no experience of any of the things that you've experienced. So you make a little hole, a little crack in the cave, and a ray of the sunlight comes through. And you say, this is the sun, which is pretty fascinating in the dark cave itself. It's light, right? Inside the dark cave. Wow, it's almost blinding because you've never seen the light. So that in itself is just overwhelming. But you say to your friend, this is the sun. I saw the sun. This is it, this ray. So that's not untrue, that the ray is the sun. Mm. But it's only a very rudimentary explanation of what the sun is, a kind of a beginning explanation. So the Upanishads speak in a basic way about the oneness between the jiva and Brahman, which is sometimes compared to the ray of the sun and the sun. Mm. The rays of the sun, of course, are one with the sun. They're fully dependent upon the sun. They don't have any separate existence from the sun. But by the sun's arrangement, through evaporation of water that produces clouds, the sun could be clouded, the rays, excuse me, could be clouded from the sun itself and think that there is no sun. So such is our condition. And the very fact that although there are statements as to our oneness with Brahman in quality, in other words, we're consciousness, not matter. We're not inert, insentient. We're not temporary. We have all these, we're enduring, we're sought. We're not inert, unconscious. We're conscious, chit. And material nature, by example, by contrast, is asat and achit, and nirananda. And we are Satchit Ananda, Anu. Jiva Swami describes the jiva is constituted of Chidananda Atmika. Chit Ananda Atmika. Atmika means to be constituted of. Chit, knowledge and bliss. And of course, we exist. Sat. So in that way, we're like Brahman. But obviously, the Vaishnavas will say we're also different in that the sun, using my previous example, can never be covered by the clouds that it produces. Here, the clouds are compared to Maya. It can never be covered by the clouds. But the rays beneath the clouds could be covered from the sun, although they're never separate from the sun. They may think of themselves as such. And so here we are, we're one with Brahman, but what kind of Brahman are we? We couldn't be the full sense of Brahman because we are deluded by the influence of the cloud of Maya. So immediately the Vaishnavas react to the statements that we're one with the qualifying statements as to the fact that we're also different. Now the oneness and difference in Gaudiya Vaishnavism is interpenetrating. So our difference from Bhagavan and our oneness are interpenetrate with one another. Let me give you an example. We as jivas have the inherent qualities of being doers, or agents of action, qualitative experiencers, and knowers. But in material life, when the material world is manifest, there are two features of the Godhead that are really operative: that the nimitta and upadan, or the instrumental and the ingredient causes of the world. So God is the instrumental cause. So with his icha, his will, his kriya, his action, his gyan, his knowledge, he makes the world manifest, right? And then there's the ingredients of the world itself, the modes of nature, the pradana, which he activates by the example is given of casting a glance on the pradana and setting it into motion. And the glance is impregnating the womb of material nature with the jivas. So the world is the jivas and the jiva shakti and the maya shakti. Now Krishna, or the Mahavishnu, his expansion, made that possible by his will, by his knowledge, by his actions. And these are all functions of the Sarup Shakti. However, he's also non-different from Maya Shakti, which has two features: this energetic feature and a substance feature, like the stuff itself and the energy. But the energy, if you will, of the Maya Shakti is is also comes from Bhagwan. So there's a Kriya Shakti, Gyan Shakti, Icha Shakti. Icha means will. So to know, to will, to act. Gyan, Icha, Kriya. So this, a shadow, if you will, or an abhas of his actual powers that are instrumental in bringing about the world are reposed in the ingredients of the world of the Maya Shakti at the same time. And it's these ingredients that become the upadi, or the designation of the body-mind complex that we're identified with. So the way in which we are a doer and a knower and a feeler, a doer of actions that are pious or impious, an experiencer of happies and sads, goods and bads, a knower in a material sense. This is all possible for those qualities of being knowers, doers, willers, whatever, by this Shakti of Bhagavan that's reposed in material nature, in the ingredient aspect of material nature. So material nature has Kriya Shakti, Icha Shakti, but it's actually from Bhagwan. And so this is not, these Shaktis are not part of the jiva's constitution. These Shaktis are part of a shadow of Bhagwan's own internal Shakti, by which he is the instrumental cause of the world. And they show up as part of the, within the ingredient contents of the material world and form the body-mind complex, for example. So the jiva as a doer in material life is doing things, as the Gita says, that are actually being done by material nature. It's a doer in that it's part of the function of Bhagavan as the ingredient cause. He puts the jivas in there and they're conscious, so they set the world in motion. But the way in which they function is dependent upon the Maya Shakti and these shadow Shaktis, if you will, of the Swarup Shakti that are part of the ingredients of material nature. So the point I'm making here is that, that as far as what is our oneness with Bhagavan, for us to act, even in the material world, we're dependent upon Bhagavan's Shaktis. Now, these are shadows of his Shaktis that he reposes in material nature that are part of the body-mind complex. But in one sense, Bhagavan's doing it, right? So he's behind everything, is the idea. So what we're doing in a kind of a secondary sense, he's actually doing. We're not independent. We're dependent upon him in every respect. Now, if we are graced with bhakti through good association, then of course the Maya Shakti's influence will be removed, and that internal Shakti of Bhagavan, by which the whole of the spiritual world is going on. Everything that's going on there by his spiritual Kriya Shakti, Icha Shakti. Let's take it's Icha Shakti, his desire. So Bhagavan has unlimited desires. He's the supreme enjoyer. So through the liberated jiva, who's now a doer under the through the vehicle of the internal Shakti of Bhagavan. That internal Shakti of Bhagavan is not an upadi, a designation, an external thing. It's part of the constitution of the jiva. That's now becomes manifest because the Maya Shakti is removed through the influence of bhakti. So it's not like the jiva has his own Shakti and he's moving around in the spiritual world. No. Just like he's moving around the material world by a shadow of Bhagavan's, an abhas of Bhagavan's internal Shakti, in a spiritual world, he's moving around, doing things, desiring. His desires are Bhagawan's desires. Bhagawan desires, and so his own form is expressed as many forms that are the swarups, or the spiritual bodies of his devotees who only desire to please him. And so he is experiencing his different desires through the agency of his devotees, whose bodies are expansion of his own self. And so there's you look at it from the oneness point of view. I'm just kind of emphasizing this one. From a material point of view, we can also see how we're one, as I'm explaining, and in the spiritual sense, even within the spiritual world, not Brahman. That's only a basic sense in which we're one with Bhagawan. But in a more, even in terms of our difference from Bhagawan, we're also one at the same time. As much as we're different from him, at the same time, we're that much one with him. So again, as we function in the spiritual world, there are unlimited jivas there with their spiritual bodies, and they're doers, they're desirers, they're experiencers, and so forth. And all of that requires Shakti for that to happen. To do something requires Shakti. So the Shakti that is there is not a shadow of the Krishna Swarup Shakti, but his actual Swarup Shakti. So if the jiva is a doer, in a full sense of the term, requires Shakti to do it, then that Shakti is the Swarup Shakti. So in that sense, we could say the Swarup Shakti is inherent in the jiva, if it's inherently a doer, a knower, an experiencer. But anyway, again, the point with regard to oneness and difference, even when we say the jiva is different from Bhagawan, and we emphasize this for bhakti and so forth, he is at the same time, the jiva is at the same time, she is as much one, because he or she, the jiva, we are just expansions of Bhagawan through which he's experiencing different desires. That's if we look at it from the Abed, non-different perspective. He has many desires. One cowherd boy, like I like to say, likes bananas. One likes mangoes. One gopi likes blue. One likes red. Krishna likes all of these things, and he's experiencing it through the different devotees. And it's unlimitedly nuanced, and it's an eternity that's dynamic. At the same time, it's always expressing itself in newer and newer ways within eternity. So even our difference from Bhagawan, as much as we're different, we're at the same time at one. This is not even speaking about the limited, rudimentary sense in which we're one with Brahman. In that Brahman is Satchidananda, we're Satchidananda Anu. There's so much more to be said as I'm explaining. So anyway, these are some thoughts on the Gaudiya perspective as to how we are one and different from Bhagawan. I mentioned other Vaishnava Sampradayas. You can look at the Ramanuja Sampradaya, which Jiva Goswami draws upon to speak about the nature of the Jiva. They have a term, we say Achintya Beta Beta, right? They say Vishishta Dvaita, qualified non-dualism. Shankar's being, by comparison, unqualified non-dualism. So the qualified non-dualism is based on the concept of where we say achintya, inconceivable, interpenetrating, oneness and difference. Ramanuja says inseparability. I forget the Sanskrit term for it, but like the blue lotus. So the lotus is there and the blue is there. The blue is the quality of the lotus. You can't separate the two, but there's blue and there's lotus. So he speaks about it in that way. We just think that our achintya, beta beta, more completely speaks to the nature of reality in a more comprehensive sense, and that's our metaphysic, our Vedanta, our argument, if you will. It's not a disagreement with Ramanuja, but just a different way of talking about it. All of which the Vaishnava Sampradayas, again, to come back to my beginning, differ from Shankar, who sees no room for any difference, whatsoever. It's all just one. There is no jiva ultimately. That's an illusion. What to speak of the body-mind complex, the self as an individual is an illusion in his perspective. There's only Brahman. It's a popular idea, but it's a very if you have the opportunity to contrast it with any of the rich Vaishnava perspectives, the richest of which I would say is the Chaitanya Vaishnava perspective, then it pales in comparison as an explanation as a harmonizing of the scriptural statements, one and difference, which seem to be in contradiction with one another, and in terms of our experience of the world, in terms of our conditioning, if the jiva is entirely one, radically in an absolute sense, well, how does God get into illusion? I mean, you got to do a fancy dance to talk about that. Our simple explanation is, well, we're the Shaktis of Bhagavan. We're also non-dualists. Advaigyan Tattva is how the Bhagavatam describes itself. This is a book about Advaigyan Tattva. Advaigyan means non-dual reality. There's a famous statement of Shankar, Sarvam idam kalo Brahma, everything is Brahman. Pujapat Sridhar Maharaj described it. Everything is Brahman. So we don't do away with everything. Everything is also there, but they're all Brahman. So Shankar, there is no other thing. So he needs to reword his aphorism. So those are some thoughts on that. It's a big topic, but complex, but interesting. So I don't know if Prajahari is on the line to reply, or
he's actually not on. He has to wait for the Spanish subtitle, so he watches it on YouTube.
Okay, well, next week, if there's any further questions that come from my answer, feel free to bring them up.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Thank you very much. So next one is from Sajan Prabhu.
Okay.
Dandavats Maharaj.
Haribol.
So just a little bit of about what you just shared. So remarkable. Everything was so wonderful what you just shared. That Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma is not an original statement by Adi Shankar. That's actually from the Upanishads itself.
I'm not sure you're right about that. I would like to see the reference.
I think can get that immediately if you like.
yeah, no, please do, because I've heard otherwise, and I don't remember seeing it in the Upanishads, and I've heard that it's generally taken to be something from the Upanishads, but it's actually Shankar's statement. But I'd like to see the reference. But either way, we have a Vaishnava explanation of it.
Yeah, sure. Something that just kind of came up for me.
Oh, you know what it is? I made a mistake. You may be right. I think it's the statement Brahma Satyam Jagan Nitya. I think
that's from Adi Shankar. Yeah, yes.
Brahman is real and the world is false. We disagree with that too.
Yeah.
Or his explanation of it.
Yeah. So
he says the world is false. When he says the world is false, he means it's not really there. We say it's there, but it's not what it looks like.
Yes. And I've heard it said by some spiritual teachers that what you just said was his actual meaning, and that's just been it's just been misinterpreted by many to think that the world doesn't exist. But it's been said that wasn't his original meaning or intention. In any case, my question for today is regarding one verse in the Bhagavad Gita, and I'm sure you know it very well. Tesham satatayoktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam Dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te.
Yes, that's actually the first verse I ever learned in the Bhagavad Gita.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
Yeah. And I learned it coming to my first Rath Yatra in San Francisco, and I chanted it all the way home from San Francisco to Los Angeles, where I was staying in the Los Angeles temple. And interestingly enough, just if you allow me a moment about this verse.
Of course.
Prior to being initiated, I was living in a preaching center in Santa Cruz Mountains, which is in between, as you know, Los Angeles and San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And we were, these were different times, and we had a rented house, and the leading devotees thought it would be nice if we wrote Bhagavad Gita verses on the wall. I don't think the owner would have necessarily have agreed, but it was not my concern. I was just doing what the leaders asked. So
right.
I didn't know it at the time, but I picked out the 4 Chatur Shlok essential verses of the Bhagavad Gita, one of which is this Tesham Satati Yuktanam, and wrote those on the wall. And the devotees were like, "Well, he chose those verses." I didn't know they were the seed verses. Later on, my experience with this verse was that Prabhupada was very kind to me. And I was in Vrindavan, and I heard he was going to cook one morning. So I thought, I'm going to go down and help Prabhupada cook. So I came down, and Prabhupada was sitting, and he wasn't cooking. And I said, Prabhupada, I heard you were going to cook, so I wanted to come and, help out. He said, no, I am not cooking. And I was a new sannyasi. I had recently taken sannyas, and Prabhupada took advantage of that, and he said, I can cook with wood. And he went on about that. What he meant was he was independent. He didn't require anything. He could live in the forest, and and this was the life of a sannyasi, completely independent. So he was going on about that. It was very nice teaching from him and inspiring. And at that, just as he was going on about that, another godbrother of mine, who I knew from Los Angeles, who happened to be there, heard that I was in speaking to Prabhupada, and he thought I was in talking to him about book distribution or something, so he wanted to come in. So anyway, he came in, and the Prabhupada's assistant let him in. His name was Goparindapal. He's a nice devotee. He lives in Hawaii now. And so there he was, and there I was. And so but the subject was different, but when Prabhupada stopped, he entertained Goparindapal's presence, and he wanted to bring up a point. And he said that, Prabhupada, I think we should have a system for teaching the devotees what to say when they sell books, so they don't misrepresent. We should make like some kind of thing that we give everybody, and these are the ways to reply.
Script.
Script, right. And Prabhupada didn't like it. He thought it was very artificial. And he said the devotees, they have their own inspiration. Krishna's given them inspiration to speak. He said, just like our Tripurari march. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipuvakam dadami buddhi yogam. Krishna is in his heart, and he's giving him the things to say. So we can't give Krishna the script, is what he was saying. Krishna's making the script, and the devotees are sincere, and that will come out, and so on and so forth. So those are, anyway, some of my thoughts about that verse that you bring up. I'm fond of it, so forgive me. But what's your question?
Oh no, nothing to forgive. That was very charming, Maharaj. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So my question actually relates to what you just expressed right now, that Krishna makes the script, so to speak, like that. And what you mentioned in your answer to I forgot the devotee's name, but the beautiful answer you gave this morning about being an instrument, being an actual instrument, rather than a separate, independent doer of actions like that. So in that regard, I just very recently, there's a spectacular abundance of archives of Srila Sridhar Maharaj on YouTube currently available. And I recently, I mean, like each one is like a treasure trove in itself. Can't even be all absorbed in one sitting, just over a number of sittings each one. So in this very recent one that I just saw, he emphasizes the principle of all rights reserved, like that, which is Krishna writes the script, what you just expressed. So and so all rights reserved. And he gave the story, I know you know the story, about the butcher who was using a Shalagram Shila inadvertently, not like knowingly, disrespectfully, but innocently using a Shalagram Shila on his scale to weigh meat. You remember that story, right? And then, you know, but for those who may not know it, very briefly, just like a Brahmin, a caste Brahmin, a proud caste Brahmin came and said, "What are you doing, you evil man, you sinner? You know, like, give me, you know, don't you know what that is or who that is?" And he said, give me, I will worship him properly. And the butcher said, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything. You know, like, please take the Shila. No, you know, like, please forgive me." And so the Brahmin took him and put him on the altar. And then that night he had a dream, as Guru Maharaj told the story, he had a dream. And Krishna came to him, perhaps as a young 8-year-old boy, you know, like angry little disappointed 8-year-old boy, said, "I was having so much fun swinging back and forth and you had to come and spoil it all," like that. You remember, but just for the benefit of everyone else who may not know the story, like that. And so the caste Brahmin, you know, like he brought the Shalagram Shila back to the butcher and said, "Oh, you know how to worship him. I do not," you know, like that. And so in this way, Guru Maharaj was emphasizing the principle of all rights reserved. And so in regard, I mean, there's a long-standing idea within the Gaudiya Vaishnava community that you know, Mirabai had no right to worship Krishna in the way that she did, or approach him with the love, particular kind of love that she had. And it's apparently, supposedly based on, you know, her not including Srimati Radharani or the other associates of Krishna, you know, like in her songs. But, you know, I happened to discover quite accidentally, without looking for it, that that's not true. That in just this one beautiful song sung by, you know, Vyasaki Prabhu, Antara Mandira Jago Jago, you know, Madhava Krishna Gopal, Mirabai states in the third verse, Yashoda Dulal Esho Esho Nanichor, "Oh, darling of Yashoda, come, please come." And then in the same verse, Loye Radha Vame, Riddhi Vraja Dame, bringing Radha along at your left, in the please come to my heart, like that. And so I was just thinking, based on this verse of Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, which we spoke about together, and what Guru Maharaj mentioned about all rights reserved, wouldn't it stand to reason that it's Krishna's right? He has the right to accept Mirabai's love as well. Even if it were true, the accusations made against her, which as it turns out, are not true, you know, wouldn't it be Krishna's right to accept her love in the way that she had expressed it?
Yes, Krishna, of course, can accept, and he does, all types of love. I don't think, though, that, can you hear me?
Yes, definitely.
I don't think that the Gaudiya Vaishnavas say that Mirabai is not a devotee, does not have experience of Krishna. They just differentiate to some extent her experience based on her songs and approach than that of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. There are many, many devotees of Braj of all different stripes and members of different sampradayas, and those who aren't connected with any sampradaya that are love Krishna in different ways and so forth. So it's obvious that Mirabai was a great devotee, but She wasn't a devotee of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu per se. She had some differences with Jiva Goswami. They were kind of charming as they're presented. But there's Vallabha Sampradayas there. We don't say Vallabha doesn't have experience of Krishna or love for Krishna. We're just differentiating between in our Sampradaya. Yes, there's a overwhelming emphasis on all the surrounding features of Vrindavan, the Jamuna, the Govardhan, the parents of Krishna, his lovers, his friends, and so on and so forth. By contrast, if you will, in Barka Sampradaya, which is the Ragmarg Sampradaya, the idea is to enter into a grove with Radha and Krishna, and nothing else, none of that other stuff's going on, so that's a window also. So different devotees enter into different windows or different prakashas of the Leela, and it's not like you got to be a little careful. And I think this may be where you're coming from in your question. Reminds me of an old joke from the Christian world, that a fellow died and went to heaven, and this was pre-Vatican II, when the Catholic Church became more ecumenical. Prior to that, it was the only way. I remember the neighbor boy was a Protestant. I thought, oh, the poor guy, he's a Protestant, he's not going to go to heaven. That's kind of how it was taught. So this is the pre-Vatican II joke, if you will. And so the Protestant, he went to heaven, and then God was showing him around, and there was this big wall. He said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, that's the Catholics are in there. They want to think they're the only ones here." So there are all types of possibilities, and Krishna can interact with anyone he likes, whenever he likes, to whatever way he likes. That's a fact. But we, at the same time, are in a particular lineage, in a particular sampradaya, and that's the window of opportunity that's come to us, and it answers to our own individuality and blueprint, if you will. That's why we respond to it, but we shouldn't respond to it in such a way as to dismiss anyone and everyone else. We should, rather than dismiss them, we should emphasize our own perspective, our own teaching, which will foster our own attainment of that ideal. You do have to be one-minded to enter into samadhi. So it's useful in a broad sense to be ecumenical, appreciate all devotees. You don't want to offend anybody, all spiritual people, and so on and so forth. And Bhakti Vinod gives a good example of that. He was very ecumenical, but in the end, just closed everything off. And for 4 years, and he didn't want to see anybody's face that wasn't, chanting Jai Radhe, for example. So the oneness of mind, if you will, is also important to keep in mind, but not at the expense of creating offense to other devotees. Mirabai ki jai.
Thank you, Maharaj. I knew that joke that you told also, and the way I heard it was that the Protestant went to heaven. Saint Peter was showing him around, and the Protestant said, "What is that big wall over there?" And Saint Peter said, "Oh, shh, that's the Catholics are behind there. They like to think they're the only ones here."
Right, exactly, yeah. One last thought on all this is, I've told the story before, but briefly, years ago, I was writing a magazine called Clarion Call when I first left ISKCON, and it was a popular magazine on the newsstands and so forth. And I did an article on women in bhakti and interviewed the widows of Vrindavan. And the head widow of the main Mahat in Vrindavan, I spoke to at length, and I asked her at one point, do you have a patron saint? And she didn't quite understand what I meant. And then I said, like Mirabai, who has a little temple that was nearby. And she understood what I said. She said, oh, yeah. She said, no, not Mirabai, Vishnu Priya.
Oh.
And her heart just came out so big, and so it was so, no, not, and she didn't dismiss Mirabai, but her heart lied with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's widowed wife, whose bhakti is a very inspiring story. So that was she was their patron saint. Mirabai ki jai, Vishnu Priya Devi ki jai, Gaur Premanande, Hari Bol.
Beautiful. Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay, what else? Any other question?
Okay, so the next question is all the way from Finland. It's Krishangi.
Okay. Into the dark of the night, of the winter of Finland. Well, you're a bright spot over there.
I hope you can hear me, Guru Maharaj.
I can see you too. So
Wonderful. My question is about Sankirtan and Japa. We often hear that for Kali Yuga, Sankirtan is the best method of self-realization, as meditation is difficult for people in this age. But we're also instructed to chant Japa, although it's more challenging. And I've been wondering about the relationship kind of between Japa and singing in kirtana, and how, and if there would be a way to kind of convert some of the enthusiasm we may feel for kirtan to our japa practice.
yes, thank you for the question. Japa is considered a limb of the tree, if you will, of dhyan, or meditation, as you've said, of smaranam. So different angas of bhakti have sublimbs to smaranam. So a sublimb of that, if you will, is japa. And at the same time, it's thought that there are three ways in which one can engage in japa. That means silently repeating in the mind the mantra, in this case the Maha Mantra, the Nam Mantra, Krishna's names, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, silently. Or upamsa means whispering the name. So you speak the name in a way that's loud enough for you to hear it, but not in a way that others can hear it. And then out loud must mean vachastik, out loud. And out loud means that others can hear it as well. Now, when it comes to out loud, then japa, which is a sub-anga of smaranam, when it's done out loud, becomes a sub-anga of kirtanam. And we find that Haridas Thakur, he said that he chanted 300 rounds. 300 rounds, was it?
300,000 names.
300,000 names a day. And sometimes it said that he chanted 100,000 silently, 100,000 whispering, and 100,000 out loud. And oftentimes there's an emphasis placed on the silent being better, because it implies that the mind has actually been controlled, right? Which is the objective of external bhakti, is to bring one internally. But on the other side, the virtues of chanting out loud are also extolled, in that not only oneself, but others can benefit from it. So let's say you're in the forest, like I am here, chanting, and the trees can hear, and the birds can hear. It's become a little bit of an airport here with so many birds these days. I like it. So chanting to the birds, to the deers, and so forth, and trying to perfect your chanting. They won't fly away or shy away. Begin with the domesticated animals. But anyway, chanting out loud, the virtues of that have also been extolled. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was concerned that his method to his own madness, which also involved his compassion for others, was such that the non-moving living beings couldn't benefit from it, whereas the moving living beings could. Haridas Thakur replied, no, when you chant out loud, then the echo that comes back, that's really the non-moving living beings chanting back. So don't worry. It's your method is perfect. It's said in Chaitanya Charitamrita sometimes that Haridas Thakur performed Sankirtan. The word Sankirtan is repeatedly used to describe his japa in different places. So it's obvious that he did chant out loud at least some of the time, and that is called Sankirtan. So there you go. You can chant out loud and sing the names, if you will, or chant them out loud on beads, and you're doing Sankirtan, which is the Yuga Dharma. Does that help? Can't hear you now.
Guraj, I remember in the past, someone, maybe myself, has asked you if that means that we could sort of, instead of chanting on the beads, we could just sing for the same amount of time. And I think at that time you said that you couldn't actually replace the chanting on beads. But
no, I don't think I said that. I've told devotees that if you have a problem chanting on beads, sit down and clap your hands or bring kartals and sing for an hour or two. It requires a little more physical energy, perhaps, but somehow or other, yeah, that's fine. You can do that. You can rather than chanting on beads, you can chant without beads, out loud and sing. So no problem.
Thank you.
Yes, Hari Kirtan ki jai, Krishna Sankirtan ki jai.
I actually have a follow-up question to Krishnami.
I'll get to that, but there's a nice description, I think, by Rupa Goswami in Astikam, glorifying Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu is coming from, in this particular prayer, described as walking from Navadvip to Jagannath Puri, and he's chanting out loud, singing loudly, Hare Krishna Mahamantra, and he's got a string with knots on it. He's doing japa. So it was like Sanatana Goswami who instituted, have Tulsi beads to chant on. There'll be 108 like this. He gave those details that Mahaprabhu asked him to come up with, drawing from different scriptures. But prior to that, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu apparently had a string or a rope with knots on it, and he chanted out loud while walking, Uchai, loudly singing the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, very beautifully described by Rupa Goswami. But you don't have to have beads or knots, just chant with feeling. So I'm sorry, your question, Ernest?
Oh yeah, I just wondered if Krishangi, is it easier for you to chant in a group, sing in a group, like if you sing alone for an hour, or if you sing in a group for an hour, is it easier for you to do it in a group? Like, could it have something to do with the fact that it's social when it's kirtan?
I guess to some extent, but for me personally, even singing alone is easier than chanting quietly alone. The music makes it more intense, like there's more feeling, more. I feel like I'm more focused.
The idea is to become absorbed. So, and how you do that, Rupa Goswami gives the answer somehow or other. Somehow or other. So there are rules that have been given, which are good guidelines that have worked and scripturally based and so forth, given in books like Hari Bhakti Vilas. But that's not it has to be done like that. Somehow or other, do it. That's the idea. So that's the rule. Somehow or other, fix your mind on Krishna. That's not hard. He's very charming. Okay, what else?
Okay, there's a question from Krishna Kanaya, unless it's a long question. We have about 5 minutes.
Oh, wonderful. Hare Krishna. Pranam. Yeah, just a quick question. Do you call yourself a sanatani? It's kind of like, yeah, like a follower of Sanatana Dharma.
Sanatanist? I've never heard the term before, sanatani, but I mean, I'm a devotee, but we are, participants members of we embrace the Sanatana Dharma, right? So, in that sense, yes, but it's not a term that I've ever heard before, and it may be used outside of Gaudiya Vaishnavism for others who identify with Sanatana Dharma, which there are many in different sects and so on and so forth. So yes, I am in that sense, but that's kind of more to look at someone like ourselves, myself, with a very broad brush, right? To get more specific into the picture, well, there's more to be said. A Gaudiya, then what kind of Gaudiya? And a friend of Krishna, what kind of friend? So you go focus more and more. But with a broad stroke, yes, we're Sanatanists or Sanatanis.
Yeah.
Sanatana. Yes, and that's there's I think the idea of the perennial philosophy first came from the Catholic theologian Leibniz. Later in modern times, it was popularized by Huxley, and he spoke about this. Well, the term perennial philosophy means this current is there in human society. It shows up in different ways, different versions of it here and there. And expressing itself through different cultures, but it's saying the same thing, basically. Of course, from there, he identified the monism of Shankar as the most complete, articulation of Sanatana Dharma. But there is another Catholic theologian, I forget his name, I'm trying to remember now, I can't recall, but he wrote a very nice commentary on the Bhagavad Gita where he compared Ramanuja with Shankar in their commentaries. And he came out with another theistic form of perennialism, which included differences within transcendence, commonality. Here, difference in approach was not just culturally based and relative, but the difference in approach had something to do with the nature or the measure, the extent of one's projection into transcendence. Very nice idea. So anyway, yeah, in that sense, Sanatanist. That'd be popular in your interfaith discussions, right? The perennial philosophy. We are Bhakti-Vinod very much could be termed a theistic perennialist. And of course, it's very attractive, it's very charming. Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they were a little more, and for good reason, less ecumenical in the way they spoke about it, because they were trying to carve out an audience in the greater world beyond India of Gaudiya Vaishnavas. So you have to see that as a strategy, and it's good and it's useful, as I was saying earlier in regard to Sajjan about being one-minded and so forth. It's essential, but it shouldn't be such that it dismisses everyone else and becomes offensive to everyone else. That's the problem. So that's how we look at, the difference between Bhakti Vinod Thakur's way he spoke and the way Bhakti Siddhanta, were strident Bhakti Siddhanta, very cutting, critiquing, Bhakti Vinod wasn't like that, but they were doing the same thing. Important point. So, all right, well, thank you all for your questions. And it was nice to be with you. I hope to be here next Sunday and meet with you all again then. Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Gaur Premanande.
Hari
Hari
Bol.
Bol.
I'd like to make an announcement once Guru Maharaj logs off.
Private. I'm included.
Yes, Guru Maharaj, not for your ears.
See, you give someone some responsibility and just see what they do.
I know. I'm grabbing the power here.
Taking all the power. Now, Guru Nishta is the perfect person to represent me in many respects because he has no desire for the power whatsoever. So I'll let you go. Haribo.
Haribo. That's of course what Guru Maharaj thinks, but he doesn't know my evil plans behind his back. Anyway, so a little more sober thing to mention. Our god sister Mohini, who's on the call right now, her brother is in the final stages of terminal cancer, and she's actually in the hospital right now, and she was requesting the prayers and well-wishing of all the devotees here so that her brother can have a peaceful passing and so forth. So I'd request all your prayers for him. Good. And that's it for this week. I hope to see you all next week, and